I walk out to my studio. Risky hears that I'm here, so I can hear him pounding on his stall because his stall's in there. I deal with Risky and put him outside. This studio was the milk room for a dairy farm, so it had a big milk tank in here. Obviously, it is no longer a dairy farm. My father-in-law sold the cows, and probably, I don't know, about 20 years ago. And eventually we did make this into my studio space. I love it because of looking out the windows or things like Risky. But it shows my work pretty well. It has, I have examples here of my linocuts. Actually, there's a linocut here. That is of our old horses, Pulsate and Jack. Jack was my son's little Arab, and Pulsate was a rescue from Scarborough Downs track. But I also cut out my linocuts and make, I guess you could call them wall pieces, installations. And one of the things that probably inspires me as far as doing big combinations of things like these or my prints over here is I have a very small press. And although I would like to have a big press, it's also probably led me to be more creative in the way that I'm putting things together. I use my many linocut plates, and I started combining them, and sometimes I combine them with plants that I have printed. And what I do when I do that is I can take these plants, and I'm going to look for my length 606 plate, sorry. And ink it up. I already have some paper torn. This is Reed's Light printmaking paper, and it has a right and a wrong side that you want to print on. I always put a little dot on the wrong side because although you can tell by the way the lines are because of the way these papers are made, sometimes it's harder for me to see it. So I'm going to take, and in this case, what I'm going to do is, because I know this is going to be plants, and I'm going to show you how it works as far as I'm inking it with my brayer. And then I'm going to put the plants on top of it, and this will actually probably give you a pretty good demonstration of what you can do with plants when you have a press. Let's do a little plug, but my printmaking how-to video shows how to print with plants using paint rather than a press. I have to get some more materials. Plants that have a strong vein structure are better for this than ones that are kind of flimsy and squishy. Using it here. And you don't even have to use plants. Ooh, I don't like that. You can use something like a feather. And what I'm going to do is put this on the press, and I actually should have a guide to let me know where to position my plate. And because I'm going to print, I usually print about 3 at a time. I have a longer piece of paper, and I'm looking for that little mark, and there it is. So now I can put this over top. I'm going to try to center it and have just a little bit at the top because I'm hopeful that I can put on some more images here. I especially want you to see what happens when I take the things off of this to the underside of them. could pull it off when I got to that side, but somehow, just because my tables are here and everything, I find myself doing is backing it up again. Now when I take this off, you can see that the leaves and the feather have acted like a stencil here. But when I take them off, I will have another image here. Then sometimes what I do is I take these, I know that they're magenta colored, and put them on top of another color. But for this one, I'm just going to take this and run this through so that you can see the impression that the leaves made. But because I have this wet, image here, I need to cover it up. It might take a little bit of the ink off, but I don't want it to get onto my blankets, although clearly it did at some other point. Run it through again. Actually, now at this point, this is much more of an interesting image than this, but once I put something over top of this, this will also be interesting. So what I'm going to do is put these plates over here. As I said, I could probably show you how I could use these, because obviously if the paper goes over this, it will have the ink that's on it. But I think what I'm going to do is find one of my linocuts, because it's kind of how I do stuff, is I combine my plant print sometimes with my linocut images. And I'm sort of looking how I can do this so that I mix up a little more ink. And as I said, try to keep my tools close, but who knows. It needs to be stirred, this particular kind of ink. And I think I'm just going to put some here because there already was some yellow.
And that's a soy-based ink?
Yes. Yes, good student. He remembers. Yes, this was developed by a printmaker, and eventually the product was sold to Speedball, but it had all sorts of input as far as safety issues that printmakers nowadays are concerned about. It used to be that, you know, there are all sorts of kind of toxic things, including cleanup with ink, that people are not really excited about having exposure to anymore. So what I'm doing is I'm thinning this a little bit. This is because I know that what I put on it, and this may not work, who knows, was a thicker ink. Usually I do it the other way around, and then think about it. Yeah, I'm going to have to go over there and get a brayer. And this one's clean. I'm going to ink this up. It's okay, actually, I think, if I get some of the other color on here because it's pretty close. I'm listening for this kind of squishy sound with the ink, and I think I can kind of see that I actually have a little bit too much on here, but I'm going to go over this and whether this will work or not, let's see. My thought is that because these inks have not dried, it's quite likely that they will mix the two colors. And what I'm looking for here is that I'm going to put this one over top of this, because then you will see the yellow when I take it off a little more visible. This one, I'm not sure what to put over top of it, to tell the truth. Let me take this one. way, but a little orange in there too and see what happens. And I'm going to just line this up. Since this is going that way, I think I want this one to go over top of it too. I talked a little bit, or I did not talk a little bit about registration. What I'm doing is just doing it by eye and using the squares to line up. If I was printing an edition where registration was something that was going to be showing rather than something I was going to cut apart, I have other ways of registering that are a little less, or that are more precise and a little less kind of hit or miss. Interesting to see how this works. At this point, I've done enough of these so that I have somewhat of a notion of what happens when you put one ink over top of another. It's usually a little more successful if you let it dry a little bit in between. And let's see what we got here. Ooh, that looks pretty cool. And ooh, that's not bad either. Oh, yay. So what I'm going to do at this point is just hang it up to dry. What I actually, the way the size of this paper, I could probably put another one here if I wanted to. I could print another one at the same same printing, or I could wait and cut that off and use it separately if I wanted to. But yeah, they're not bad. I think you can probably see them a little better as far as what's happening if I pin it like this, because the trees have kind of a definite up and down going there. Oh, come on. Very often when I do printing of a couple of plates together, I take Post-it notes and I block out an area on the linocut. Obviously I line it up so that it's even on the edges, and I run it through. This area is not going to print, so what does that mean? That means that I can take another print plate and put that where that was and run the whole thing together, so that I can keep building up my images that way as well. This one, for example, has the beneath where the green was printed first with the plants, the second printing of the plants. Then what I did was I inked a circle, which was here, and I inked turquoise. But before I ran it through, I put this here so that it's blocking out, and I have a square left in the center that I then took and printed this on so that I got the square inside the circle. And one of the things that you may not have been able to see as well with what I just did is that everything is a mirror image when you print. You can see that this is the mirror image of that. The printmaking that I'm doing here is dependent upon a press, but the project that I have for the weekend for students is using paint and leaves and other found materials. Rather than using a press to print them, you're going to be just using your hands to make the impressions. I love printmaking, so I encourage you, even if you don't have the opportunity to have a press, to think about all the things that you can do by printing by hand. So when I was in high school, I actually did a lot of linocuts. But then I went to art school and I didn't do any printmaking at all. In fact, my concentration was in filmmaking, and I decided not to go to graduate school for filmmaking. And after I had my children, I took some lessons at the Washington Art Association from a printmaker and got really excited about printmaking. And the type of printmaking that I was doing then was not relief printing, where you're rolling ink on top, but etching and intaglio printing, where in this case you were making your images on metal plates and biting them, which to get the image in acid, and the nitric acid in this case really started getting to my face. So I changed to this form of printmaking, but I've been doing it for a long time. As I said, my children were young when I first took a printmaking class. I don't think I want to say how old they are now, but I have grandchildren. So my concentration was in ceramics. And in fact, these are something that I made when I was there. And it was in ceramics because I didn't have a professor that could be your, I don't know, whatever it is, advisor or whatever in printmaking. But the prints that the ceramics that I did, I actually, most of them were wall reliefs, somewhat like printing, somewhat like what I'm doing here. And my graduate show was many, many years ago, again, at the Northwest Library. So, yeah, I've had an association with Norfolk for a long time, though obviously I don't live there. Oh, I like that, yes.
And you said this piece, you took some sort of comic book influence?
I did. Not all of the ones that are in here came from that, but you can see how I have kind of some lettering in here, and the way that one of the things that I was intrigued about with comic books was not necessarily the comic book story, although my sons were, but the way the images were put together, as far as, again, it was sort of a grid in many cases, but yeah, there were some comic book illustrators that I like because of the flow of the story visually. So, and it's actually quite a bit like filmmaking.
So tell me about the weather vane.
When we rebuilt our barn, we were very excited to have a weather vane from John Thu as the crowning touch on the top of the roof. And love John Thu, love his work, so just we're so glad to be able to get that. That building was the sap house that you can see that's kind of imploded. My parents-in-law and their neighbors used to do maple sugaring, and the sap house is still there. And my husband was originally going to fix it, but at this point it's a little too damaged. But
Oh,
it's a reminder.
a little paint.
What?
A little paint.
A little paint. He's hoping to feed him.